Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the heart of Venice in the 14th century. The air is damp, the canals are breathing out their fog, and the bells of San Marco are tolling, shaking you awake before the sun even climbs the horizon. You roll over on your straw mattress, sighing, because this isn't exactly the luxurious start you might picture when you hear the word merchant. Sure, you're no starving peasant, but you're also not sipping cappuccino in bed. Coffee won't even arrive in Europe for another 2 centuries. So congratulations, you're already running on bread crusts and wishful thinking. And honestly, you probably won't survive this life for long, between the plagues, the taxes, and the occasional rival stabbing you in the dark alley behind your warehouse. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink against the gloom of your chamber. The shutters rattle slightly from the breeze off the lagoon, and faint light sneaks through the cracks. Your first sensation is the clang of bells from one of the countless campanili, those brick towers dotting the skyline like jagged teeth. In Venice, bells are your alarm clock, your timetable, your deadline manager. They wake you at dawn, and later, they'll remind you when the city decides it's time to stop selling wine or when Mass begins. You stretch, bones creaking, and sit upright on your narrow bed. The straw ticks and rustles beneath you, leaving a faint, earthy smell in the air. Your feet touch cool wooden planks, worn smooth by years of pacing. No carpets, unless you're extremely wealthy, and even then you'd hesitate. Imported rugs from the East are so costly you'd rather show them off in your main hall than waste one in a private chamber. Outside, a gondolier is already calling out, his voice bouncing over the canal as he ferries a passenger who's clearly in a hurry. You can hear the splash of his, or breaking the glassy surface. Venice never really sleeps. There's always a ship arriving, a cart trundling across a wooden bridge, a baker pulling loaves from his oven. The smell of baking bread mingles with the sea air drifting in, sharp with salt and fish. Your stomach growls, because you know exactly what awaits. A plain breakfast of yesterday's loaf, maybe softened with watered wine. Forget eggs and bacon. Those are luxuries you won't see on your morning plate unless you've just struck gold in Constantinople or found yourself at a nobleman's table. As you dress, pulling on a tunic dyed a modest shade, indigo if you're lucky, brown if you're practical, you lace your belt tight and slip on worn leather shoes. Historians still argue whether Venetian merchants wore softer, slipper-like shoes inside their homes, but in the street you'll need something sturdier. Especially if you're climbing the Rialto Bridge later, where goods are exchanged faster than gossip. Before stepping outside, you splash water on your face from a ceramic jug. You don't drink this water. It might be collected from a cistern, filtered through sand, but it's still risky. Venice's clean water depends on elaborate systems of wells and rain capture, and even then, you've probably lost an uncle to dysentery. Better to stick with wine. Weak, sour, but safe. The bells ring again, and you mutter under your breath. Sometimes you wonder if the priests do it just to flex their control. Every clang is both a spiritual call and a civic reminder that your time isn't fully your own. You sigh, slipping into the rhythm of the day. You know the city will already be alive. Apprentices rushing with baskets, nuns walking in pairs, and fishermen lugging their nets through alleyways that smell perpetually of salt and rot. A quirky detail? Some Venetians swear that if you eat garlic first thing in the morning, you'll keep evil spirits and creditors away. You consider it, but decide your breath is already offensive enough after a night's sleep. You step into the narrow calle, where your shadow stretches against the damp stone walls. This isn't a grand entrance of marble and arches. Most Venetian merchants live tucked between warehouses and shops. The noble families flaunt their palazzi along the Grand Canal, their Gothic windows glittering with glass. You, instead, find dignity and modesty, though you secretly envy their carved balconies. As you walk, you notice how uneven the street feels beneath your feet. Planks bridge puddles left from last night's tide. In some alleys, water still laps gently, as though the sea itself refuses to be excluded from morning routines. You're never far from its briny breath. A stray cat darts past, heading toward a fishmonger's stall that hasn't even opened yet. Cats are everywhere here, unofficial guardians against rats that gnaw through grain sacks and more ominously carry fleas. You shiver involuntarily. Memories of the last wave of plague still cling to the city like mildew. Half your neighbors gone in a season, coffins loaded onto barges at night. And yet somehow, Venice continues, bells ringing as though nothing happened. By the time you reach the corner where a baker sets out his first trays, the air is alive with chatter. Housewives in wool shawls barter for loaves, apprentices clutch coins from their masters, and beggars hover in doorways with outstretched hands. You slide a few coppers across the counter for bread, tucking the loaf beneath your arm. It's coarse, flecked with barley, dense enough to double as a weapon if someone annoyed you. And yes, you'll eat it with wine because water is a gamble you never win. You glance at the canal, where sunlight finally breaks over the horizon, glinting on water that looks deceptively pretty. The reflection dances on the stucco walls, making the whole street shimmer faintly, as though Venice itself has just woken. You chew your bread slowly, gaze drifting. Some mornings, you wonder if the entire city runs on stubbornness. Here you are, living on tiny islands of mud and wood, building warehouses that sink slowly into the lagoon. Historians still argue whether Venetian ingenuity was madness or genius. Maybe both. But for now, you're grateful enough to have bread in hand, bells in your ears, and the faint thrill of trade calling you forward. Your day and your meals have just begun. You sit on a worn stone bench overlooking the canal, chewing your rough bread. It scrapes your teeth a little. This isn't the fluffy loaf you might imagine, but a dense, dark hunk that feels like it's training you for jaw strength. Venetian bakers mix barley, rye, or whatever grain they can get their hands on, depending on trade flows. Wheat's the dream, of course, but it's expensive and has to be imported. So most mornings you settle for something closer to a brick. You tear another piece, dunking it briefly into your watered wine. Don't romanticize this. Your wine isn't a robust Chianti. It's thin, sour, sometimes cloudy, and half the time tastes like it was stored in a barrel that previously held something questionable. But it's safer than water, and honestly, the alcohol buzz helps you ignore the canal smell wafting behind you. And yes, this is your breakfast. A merchant's morning meal in 14th-century Venice is quick, light, and utilitarian. Forget pancakes or omelets. This is survival fuel, not brunch at a hip cafe. You eat fast because work waits, and your stomach will hold out until the larger midday meal. Children dart past, chasing each other with shrill laughter, their wooden shoes clacking on the cobblestones. A street dog growls at them, tail wagging despite its mangy coat. Meanwhile, a pair of fishermen unload their catch nearby, throwing still-flapping sardines into baskets. The smell punches you in the nose like an uninvited guest, but you've grown used to it. Venice is basically a perfume blend of salt water, fish guts, damp stone, and smoke from hearth fires. You sip more wine and glance at the passing gondolas. Some carry wealthy ladies in veils, servants rowing while the ladies chat behind curtains. Others carry crates, spices, textiles, wax, headed toward the Rialto. For a moment, you imagine the exotic goods that might be inside. Cinnamon from Ceylon, pepper from India, ginger packed in little jars. These flavors are rare luxuries, but they'll eventually trickle into your meals, reminding you that your city's stomach is fed by half the world. A quirky tidbit? Some Venetians swore that if you sprinkled breadcrumbs on your threshold, witches couldn't enter your home. They'd be too distracted counting the crumbs. You half wish you'd remembered to do that last night, given the suspicious drafty creaks in your rafters. You watch as a monk passes, robes brushing the ground. He stops at the baker's stall, handing over a small coin for a loaf. The church controls so much of your daily rhythm, even your breakfast. Remember the fasting days? The calendar dictates when you can eat meat, when you must stick to fish. and when you're basically chewing vegetables and regretting life. Historians still argue whether strict Lenten fasts were always followed, or if merchants like you quietly bribed cooks to sneak in sausage under the cover of darkness. You wouldn't put it past your peers. As the bells toll again, you down the last gulp of wine. It's not satisfying, not indulgent, but it keeps you alive, and more importantly, it keeps your head clear enough to face ledgers and negotiations. You tuck the last bite of bread into your satchel, in case you need a quick chew later. Your morning meal may be humble, but it roots you in Venice's reality, a city that thrives not on luxury breakfasts, but on the determination to survive each day with whatever the tides, markets, and trade winds provide. You dust the crumbs from your lap and rise, tugging your cloak tighter as you set off toward the Rialto market. Morning air in Venice has a strange sharpness, equal parts salt spray, wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of bread baking. But by the time you're halfway down the calle, another smell overtakes everything: fish. Always fish. The Rialto is Venice's stomach. By mid-morning, it throbs with bodies, merchants, sailors, housewives, apprentices, and you are just one more figure weaving into the chaos. You follow the current like driftwood in the tide, your ears ringing with the chorus of shouting vendors. Fresh sardines, still wriggling, anchovies, salted or whole, eels for fasting days, strong as the devil. The cries crash against you from every stall, louder than the bells, more insistent than your stomach. It's not just fishmongers here. You catch a whiff of cumin and pepper drifting from a spice merchant's table, where tiny sacks of powder are guarded like gold. A little boy holds up a single lemon the way someone today might hold a diamond ring. The bright yellow glows in the gray morning light, shocking against the backdrop of dull stone and drab cloaks. You pause near a barrel where live crabs clatter against each other, pincers scraping the wood. A woman argues heatedly with the fish seller, waving a sardine in his face like an accusation. You smirk. Haggling is Venice's favorite sport after gossip, and you'll be doing your share of it today. The soundscape is relentless. The slap of fish on scales, the creak of wooden carts rolling over planks, the rush of voices speaking Venetian, Greek, even snippets of Arabic. You realize this market isn't just for food. It's where half the world brushes shoulders. A bag of rice from Egypt might sit next to a wedge of Alpine cheese. You can smell cinnamon alongside garlic, oranges alongside onions. Your stomach turns traitor, growling at the mixed perfume of salt and spice. Breakfast feels a distant memory. A quirky tidbit? Some Venetian merchants believed carrying nutmeg in your pocket could ward off the plague. Imagine walking around with a spice that today would cost you a couple of coins, but back then was more valuable than silver. You glance at one vendor's pouch of the stuff and consider whether your purse could stand the hit. Probably not. As you make your way deeper into the market, you pass men balancing massive baskets of mussels on their backs, water still dripping from the shells. They shout warnings, clear the way, but no one really does. A boy stumbles into your leg, nearly sending figs spilling from his tray. You steady him with one hand, then quickly snatch a fig when he isn't looking. Sweetness bursts across your tongue, sunshine trapped in fruit form, and you lick your lips, grinning at your tiny theft. Historians still argue whether Venetian markets were more regulated or more chaotic. The government claimed to keep order, issuing laws about weights, measures, and prices, but judging by the shouting around you, enforcement is about as consistent as the tide. For every honest merchant, there's a sly one watering wine or patting fish with extra ice to hide the stench of decay. You've probably bought both in your time. Your nose leads you next to the spice stall. The seller unrolls a bolt of cloth, revealing tiny glass jars filled with precious powders. The sight is intoxicating. Bright saffron like powdered sunlight, black peppercorns, ginger roots shriveled but pungent. He lifts the lid from one jar, and the scent of cloves hits you, sharp enough to make your eyes water. You almost sneeze, which would ruin your bargaining stance. And here's the irony. While you, a Venetian merchant, have access to these wonders, you rarely eat them in excess. They're too expensive. More often, They pass through your hands to wealthier clients in Northern Europe, where kings and dukes pay fortunes to sprinkle pepper on their boar's meat. But every so often, you keep a pinch for yourself. Just enough to turn a pot of otherwise bland barley stew into something that feels like magic. The market swells with heat, sweat, and chatter. You step aside to let a mule carrying sacks of salt clop past, its hooves slipping on the damp stones. Salt, the lifeblood of preservation, the silent backbone of every meal. Without it, Venice couldn't feed itself through winter, couldn't stock its ships for long voyages. You give the mule a respectful nod, as though it understands its role in your survival. By the time you reach the far end of the Rialto, the sun is high enough to paint the canal in shimmering light. Gondolas nudge each other for space, their hulls creaking, while porters unload crates in a rhythm that never stops. You stand for a moment, bread crust still clutched in your satchel, wine buzzing faintly in your veins, and realize, this isn't just breakfast shopping. This is the beating heart of your city, a place where every meal begins, every fortune is tested, and every rumor spreads faster than a spilled barrel of herring. You tighten your belt, stomach still restless, and prepare to face the rest of the day. You lean against a wooden railing at the edge of the Rialto Bridge, watching gondolas nose through the current below. The last of your bread is gone, the sour wine has warmed your chest, and your stomach rumbles for something more, something hot. Instinctively, you reach for a thought that doesn't yet exist: coffee. A steaming cup, bitter and fragrant, to shake off the fog of dawn. But this is the 14th century, and coffee is still a guarded secret of far-off Ethiopia and Yemen. Venetians won't even sip it for another 200 years. So instead, you settle for what you do have. Another splash of thin wine, sometimes warmed gently over coals if you're lucky, or figs, sticky and sweet, plucked from a vendor's stall. These are the boosters of your morning, not caffeine shots, but tiny jolts of sugar and sourness to push you toward your ledgers and contracts. You bite into a fig, its seeds crunching, syrup coating your fingers, and you think maybe this is enough. Maybe coffee would just be an unnecessary distraction. Then again, you're also half asleep on your feet, so maybe not. Around you, the city is fully awake now. Apprentices hurry past, balancing baskets of goods that smell better than you'll taste today. Bakers wave fresh loaves from their stalls, steam still curling from the crust. You pass a woman hawking roasted chestnuts, their skins popping open with a hiss that fills the air with a nutty perfume. Your mouth waters. Historians still argue whether merchants like you indulged in much morning snacking, or whether most stuck to the one larger meal at midday. Evidence is thin. Diaries mention bread and wine, but the roasted chestnut stalls and paintings suggest that temptation lurked at every corner. You, being human, occasionally cave. A copper coin later, and you're peeling the hot shell from a chestnut, blowing to cool it, and popping it into your mouth. It's smoky, soft, and comforting, almost like breakfast was supposed to be this way all along. The canal shimmers below, but don't get too dreamy. One whiff reminds you why wine and chestnuts are safer than water. The green surface ripples as waste from households upstream drifts by. The canal is Venice's sewer, its highway, its trash chute, and its stage, all at once. You wrinkle your nose. No matter how pretty the reflections look, you won't be dipping a jug in there for a drink. A quirky tidbit? Some Venetians insisted that figs soaked in vinegar could cure seasickness. Sailors would chew them before voyages, hoping to keep their guts calm when the Adriatic turned rough. You're not sailing today, but you tuck the idea away, knowing your next trip east might require more than prayers to St. Nicholas. Still chewing, you drift toward a group of fellow merchants gathered outside a tavern, their cloaks flapping in the breeze. They're already sipping morning wine, discussing shipments, and laughing at a bawdy joke you catch only the end of. You join them with a nod, because this is where real work begins. Not in the ledger room, but in these casual sips and sidelong glances. Deals often start here, over cheap wine and finger food. One man slides a plate of olives across the table, their brine sharp enough to make your mouth pucker. Another cracks almonds with a little iron press, shells scattering onto the stone floor. You pick one up, pop it into your mouth, and feel your teeth crunch through its dry sweetness. Just like that, you've slipped into a Venetian version of a coffeehouse chat, only with wine, olives, and nuts instead of caffeine and croissants. And for a moment, you wonder what it would be like if coffee did exist here. If instead of yawning through watered wine, you were jittering on a dark, fragrant brew. Would merchants strike bolder deals? Would Venice rise faster, burn brighter, crash harder? Historians still argue whether the later arrival of coffeehouses truly reshaped European business culture, or if they were just another excuse to gossip loudly. But for now, your 14th century day continues with figs, chestnuts, olives, and almonds, simple, salty, sweet stand-ins for the hot drink you don't yet know you're missing. You swallow the last sip of sour wine, wipe your fingers on your cloak, and turn back toward the Rialto. The day is waiting, and so is your ledger. The Rialto hums around you, louder with each passing moment. Merchants shout, gondoliers curse, and porters grunt as they shoulder bales of wool and crates of oil. But you slip away from the busiest stalls, crossing a narrow bridge into a quieter lane where your warehouse sits. Here, the real grind begins, not with fishmongers or spices, but with ink-stained fingers, numbers stacked in crooked columns, and endless scratching across parchment. You drop onto a heavy bench at your desk, the wood scarred with knife marks and candle burns from years of late nights. The room smells faintly of mildew and salt, because everything in Venice smells of mildew and salt, but also of ink and beeswax from the candle stub flickering in the gloom. You unroll a ledger, thick with pages that sag under the weight of calculations. Columns of numbers march down the parchment like weary soldiers. Your stomach growls. Of course it does. Bread and wine only hold for so long. From your satchel, you pull a small pouch of almonds. These little things are your secret allies, crunchy lifelines tucked away for when business stretches past hunger. You crack one with your teeth, the nut oily, slightly sweet, and satisfying in its simplicity. You chew slowly, trying to time each bite with the scratch of your quill. A quirk of the trade. Venetian merchants often use dried fruit and nuts as both snacks and bribes. An almond slipped across the desk during a negotiation can soften tempers. A cluster of raisins dropped into a guest's hand is a gesture of courtesy. Food is currency as much as sustenance, and you never forget it. Your quill scratches the parchment. Ink pools and spreads, staining the margin where your hand slipped. Numbers blur, debts owed in Ragusa, spices promised from Alexandria, cloth expected from Florence. You mutter under your breath, adding and subtracting, praying you don't misplace a zero. The city thrives on commerce, but one wrong mark in a ledger can sink a fortune faster than a storm in the Adriatic. Historians still argue whether Venetian bookkeeping was the true birth of modern accounting, or whether the Florentines deserve more credit. Either way, you can feel history pressing down on your quill with every stroke. Double entry, debit and credit, columns that balance like the ropes of a gondola. All this is becoming your daily language. But it's not glamorous. Your fingers cramp, your shoulders ache, and your eyes blur in the dim light. So you reach for another almond. Crunch. The sharp taste jolts you awake, grounding you in the present. You remember an old superstition, that eating almonds sharpens the mind. Sailors chew them before navigating, scholars before debates, and you, well, you're chewing them before trying to figure out why a client in Constantinople insists he paid you already when your columns say otherwise. Maybe the almonds will help. Maybe they won't. Outside, gondolas bump gently against the dock, the water sloshing. Voices drift in through the shutters, dockhands arguing over fees, a street singer plucking a lute. The city never stops buzzing, and you feel like you're perched in the hive's very center, nibbling almonds while tallying honey. Every so often, you pause to sip watered wine from a small ceramic cup. Not because it's delicious, but because it moistens your throat after so much muttering and calculating. You consider dipping the almonds in wine for variety, then laugh at yourself. That's desperation talking. By midday, your stomach is gnawing again. The almonds are gone, their shells scattered across the desk like tiny bones. You stretch, rubbing your stiff neck, and look out the narrow window. Sunlight glitters off the canal, dazzling enough to make you squint. Down below, a fishmonger yells, "Fresh eels. Only 2 denarii." And you wonder if that'll be your lunch. A quirky tidbit? Some merchants rubbed almond oil on parchment to keep ink from smudging. You try it once, and it just leaves greasy fingerprints. Maybe the trick only works if you know exactly what you're doing. Or maybe it's just one of those Venetian myths whispered in taverns after too much sour wine. Either way, your ledger is heavy with ink, your pouch is empty of nuts, and your stomach is plotting mutiny. You slam the ledger shut, scattering shells across the desk, and rise to your feet. Time to find real food. You push the ledger aside with a satisfying thump, like closing the door on an irritating guest. Your belly is hollow, the almonds long gone, and it's high noon. Time for the real meal of the day. The midday table is where merchants refuel, swap gossip, and strike half of the city's backroom deals. Bread and wine in the morning were just survival. Now, you're heading for comfort. The streets leading back toward the Rialto taverns are thick with people. Gondolas press against the banks, porters trudge under loads of wool and olive oil, and above it all, the bells toll again, lunch bells. As if the whole city agrees, enough ledgers, enough bargaining, it's time to eat. You duck into a tavern you know well. The ceiling is low, beams heavy with smoke from a fire pit in the corner. Long tables run the length of the room, already crowded with men in wool cloaks, shouting to be heard over each other. You squeeze onto a bench beside a fellow trader, his beard shiny with grease from whatever he's eating. The tavern maid slams down a plate in front of you. Pasta. Not the twirling, tomato-laced kind you'd recognize today, but thick noodles boiled in broth, a pale yellow heap steaming in the bowl. You drizzle a little oil over it, sprinkle hard cheese grated fine, and shovel in a mouthful. It's chewy, warm, filling. Food that doesn't care about beauty, only about keeping you on your feet. Beside it comes salted pork, sliced into chewy strips that taste of smoke and brine. Your jaw works hard, but the flavor lingers long after you swallow. A slab of coarse bread mops up the juices. Between bites, you sip more watered wine, hoping it'll wash the salt down. A quirky tavern habit. Diners sometimes share the same trencher, a slab of stale bread used as a plate. Grease seeps into it through the meal, and at the end, you either eat the sodden bread or toss it to the beggars waiting outside. Today you've got your own wooden bowl, but you watch 2 apprentices tearing into their trencher like wolves, laughing with mouths full. The air grows thicker with each dish carried out. Plates of cheese pass from hand to hand. Hard goat cheeses that crumble in your fingers, softer varieties with sharp, tangy smells that linger on your beard. The smell of onions and garlic wafts up from the pot, making you both hungry and wary. Historians still argue whether the average Venetian merchant's midday table leaned heavier on meat or fish. The church's calendar limited meat on fast days, but taverns certainly didn't lack pork, mutton, or veal for those who could pay. And you today are paying. You need something solid in your belly before tackling more accounts. The room hums with more than chewing. A man beside you whispers about a spice shipment delayed in Alexandria. Another complains about Florentine bankers raising interest rates. You keep your ears open while your teeth grind salted pork. This is how deals start. A muttered rumor over lunch can become a trade route tomorrow. Then, as the tavern quiets for a moment, a platter arrives at your table. Beans stewed with herbs, their earthy smell cutting through the meat's richness. You ladle some onto your bread and bite down. Soft, creamy, flavored with rosemary. Humble food, but every bit as satisfying as the costly pork. You laugh to yourself, thinking that the peasant in the lagoon marshes is eating nearly the same thing right now. A quirky tidbit. Some Venetians swore that chewing fennel seeds after a heavy lunch kept the stomach from boiling. You fish a couple out of a pouch at your belt, chew thoughtfully, and decide it's more superstition than science. Still, the sweet, grassy taste isn't unpleasant. Your neighbor raises a cup. "To trade," he booms, splashing wine onto the table. Everyone cheers, cups clinking, bread crusts waving in mock salute. The room feels alive, almost like a feast. By the time you lean back, belly heavy with noodles, cheese, beans, and salted pork, you know you'll need a walk before facing the ledger again. The tavern hums, men still eating, women carrying platters, smoke curling in the rafters. You wipe your hands on your cloak, stand, and step outside into the daylight. Venice smells no better out here, but at least it's fresh air. The midday meal lingers in your belly like ballast in a ship, but there's no time for napping. You step back into the sunshine, tugging your cloak tight, and the air is full of voices. Today is Friday, which means no pork, no mutton, no meat at all. Not if you value your soul. The church demands fish, and in Venice, surrounded by water, there's no shortage. The streets smell sharper on Fridays. Everywhere you turn, fishmongers are gutting sardines, slicing eels, stacking baskets of mussels still dripping from the lagoon. The salty tang hangs so thick you almost taste it before you buy anything. You thread through the crowd, your eyes stinging from the sheer volume of scales and brine. At a corner stall, you stop. The vendor lifts a writhing eel from a bucket, its body twisting like a rope come to life. He grins and slams it onto the block, chopping its head clean off before you can even protest. The eel twitches a little, then lies still. He tosses it to his apprentice, who slips it into your sack. Dinner sorted. Historians still argue whether Venetians treated fish days as punishment or indulgence. To a mainland farmer, fish was a poor substitute for beef. But here, in a lagoon where boats return heavy every morning, fish is abundant, sometimes even luxurious. In fact, a roasted sturgeon could make a nobleman drool faster than a spit-roasted pig. You wander toward a grill, where sardines sizzle over open flame. The vendor bastes them with oil, sprinkles salt, and flips them quickly, skin crisping and curling. You buy two, burn your fingers peeling them apart, and gulp the flesh straight from the bones. It's smoky, salty, faintly sweet, a perfect snack to carry you until supper. A quirky tidbit? Venetians once believed eating cuttlefish ink could cleanse the blood. You've tried it once in pasta, and though it turned your mouth black as coal, you didn't feel any purer afterward. Still, you'd order it again. The flavor lingers, briny and strange. You pass more stalls. Oysters shucked onto trays, clams piled in baskets, anchovies salted and pressed in barrels. Fishwives shout louder than any spice merchant, their voices cracking as they slap fish onto scales, daring you to doubt the weight. The air is full of gulls, their cries shrill as they dive for scraps. Cats dart between ankles, licking at dropped guts before the gulls can snatch them. You know the church calendar by heart. Wednesdays, Fridays, and of course Lent, no meat. Some years, it feels like half your meals are fish. But Venice adapts. Recipes evolve, sauces thicken, spices sneak in to mask the monotony. You remember a banquet once where even fish was disguised. Eel roasted until it looked like pork, carp baked in pies to resemble venison. God might have been fooled, but your stomach wasn't. Today, though, you're content with simplicity. Sardines and bread, eel for supper, maybe mussels if you feel generous. You sip a little wine from a leather flask, watching the lagoon glitter under the sun. A group of children splash near the steps, trying to catch minnows in their hands. Their mothers scold them, reminding them the canal water is no place to play. You shake your head, remembering the last outbreak of illness. People still argue whether the plague came from fleas on rats or bad air rising from the marsh. Either way, the water isn't innocent. The bells toll again. You sling your sack over your shoulder and head back to your warehouse, mind already wandering to the taste of grilled eel waiting later. Fish might be a church mandate, but in Venice, it's also a gift. You sling your sack of eel onto the desk, the ledger glaring at you like an unwelcome guest. But you're not ready for more numbers yet. Your stomach, restless after salted pork yesterday and sardines this morning, craves something quick, hot, and greasy. You close the ledger with a slap, shove your stool back, and head for the Cali again. The side streets around the Rialto are alive with vendors who feed the working class. Not banquets, not feasts, Just the kind of snacks that keep you on your feet between shipments and contracts. And today, the smell leads you straight to a wooden cart where a man scoops spoonfuls of chickpea batter into bubbling oil. The hiss is loud, the air thick with fried perfume. He flips the fritters with practiced speed, crisping them golden brown, then sprinkles a little salt before handing you a paper cone. You burn your fingers snatching one too soon, blow on it, then bite. The crust cracks under your teeth, the inside soft, nutty, and almost creamy. You sigh out loud. This is better than half the banquets you've attended, because it's real. Simple, cheap, perfect. A quirky tidbit. Some Venetians claimed chickpeas made you witty. Apprentices stuffed pockets with roasted chickpeas before public debates, hoping to impress their masters. You pop another fritter in your mouth and feel clever already, though it's probably just the heat giving you energy. Around you, the street is a carnival of smells. Roasted chestnuts crack in iron pans. A boy sells candied almonds, the sugar crust glinting like jewels. Another cart offers dried figs, piled high in a sticky mound. You hand over a coin and toss a fig into your mouth, juice dribbling down your chin, before chasing it with another fritter. Balance, right? The crowd here is different from the taverns. You see apprentices, boatmen, widows with baskets, beggars hovering at the edge of the crowd. Everyone needs a quick bite, whether rich or poor, and the vendors know it. Some merchants even say more trade is negotiated over street snacks than in the Doge's palace. Historians still argue whether these food stalls were regulated or tolerated. Officially, Venice prided itself on order, with laws about weights and measures. But one look at the vendor's oil, dark, reused too many times, and you know nobody's inspecting it. Not that you care. The fritters are divine. You wander a little, cone in hand, and watch the world. A gondolier leans against his boat, scarf around his neck, munching on fried anchovies straight from a bag. Two nuns walk briskly, habits swaying, one chewing roasted nuts while the other pretends not to notice. A group of children giggle around a stall selling honey cakes, their hands sticky as they tear the cakes apart. You buy one too, why not? It's small, round, glazed with a sheen of honey that glues to your fingers. You bite in and the sweetness hits hard, almost medicinal. Sugar is rare, still thought of more as a spice than a sweetener. But in these cakes, it feels like a glimpse of heaven. Your pockets lighter, your belly happier, you lick honey from your thumb and keep walking. The street food has done its job, lifted your mood, filled your stomach, and reminded you that Venice's pulse isn't just in the palaces or warehouses. It's here, at the carts, where chickpeas sizzle, almonds crack, figs drip juice, and hungry merchants like you get through another afternoon. You rub your sticky fingers against your cloak, knowing it'll leave faint honey streaks that later you'll regret, but for now the sugar rush keeps you humming along the canals. Afternoon stretches over Venice like a cat in the sun, lazy, golden, and slower with each passing hour. Business might still be buzzing, gondolas creaking as they ferry men and wares across the waterways, but your mind has already wandered toward the promise of supper. The fritters and figs carried you through the early hunger, but Venice is a city that loves ceremony, even in eating. Supper isn't just food. It's rhythm, performance, an anchor to close the day. The wealthy might summon private cooks, the poorer ones huddle around hearths, and you, as a middling merchant with your feet in both canals, prepare to head to a tavern. The smell hits you before you arrive. Wood smoke, garlic, and something richer, onions sweating slowly in fat. The doorway spills yellow light onto the flagstones, the kind of glow that lures travelers like moths. You duck inside, brushing past a heavy curtain meant to trap heat. The tavern is alive. Men in wool cloaks sit hunched at long tables, their breath mixing with the steam of stews. Women bustle between benches carrying wooden bowls, and from the back, a fiddle scratches out a tune meant to drown the din dogs skulk underfoot, hoping for bones, and once in a while a cat darts across the rafters, scattering dust. You wedge yourself at a table and signal for food. No menu, no choices. The innkeeper serves what the pot has made, and tonight it's thick soup ladled from a cauldron so wide it could drown a man. The woman who slams it in front of you grins. Eat before it cools. You lift your spoon. Barley, beans, bits of cabbage, and just enough pork fat to perfume the broth. Each sip feels like it coats your insides, the warmth spreading into tired muscles. The bread on the side is dense, coarse, studded with seeds, but dipped in the broth, it softens and becomes a treasure. Here's a mainstream fact slipping in with the steam. Venice's merchants didn't live on exotic spices alone. Despite their trade, their daily suppers looked a lot like this. Soups stretched with legumes, bread to fill the belly, and whatever scraps of meat or fish remained from market. A merchant might occasionally splash out for a peacock pie at a feast, but on a weeknight, soup, bread, maybe wine. You chew slowly, letting the barley grains burst between your teeth. The man beside you, a sailor with arms like ship ropes, slurps noisily, then wipes his chin on his sleeve. Across the table, two men argue over salt, whether the tax will rise again. You pretend not to listen, though of course you do. The tavern smells stronger now. Cabbage, smoke, wet wool. Someone has spilled wine, and the floor is sticky underfoot. The fiddler shifts into a livelier tune, and a boy beats a rhythm on the table with a spoon. A woman bursts into laughter so loud it silences the room for a heartbeat before everyone joins in. A quirky tidbit slips into your bowl. Some Venetians believed onions cured melancholy, which may explain why tonight's soup tastes heavy with them. You spoon up a translucent slice, thinking maybe they're right, your mood has lifted. Or maybe that's just the second cup of wine you've ordered. Now comes the meat, or what passes for it. A tray of sausages is passed down the table, greasy links spitting fat onto the wooden board. You spear one with your knife and nearly burn your lips on the casing. Inside, ground pork, fennel, a whisper of pepper. You sigh because pepper is expensive, but here it is, proof that even common taverns taste the world's spice routes. Historians still argue whether pepper in daily Venetian meals was truly widespread or more symbolic, a grain or two to show status. All you know is that tonight's sausage carries enough heat to make you swallow your wine fast. You don't care whether it was meant as status or seasoning. To your tongue, it's luxury. Between bites, you watch the room. A group of German merchants at the far end gesture wildly, their language harsh as broken wood. Beside them, a young gondolier croons a love song, though the girl he sings to hides her smile in her cloak. The innkeeper moves through it all like a ship's captain, balancing trays, collecting coins, settling quarrels with the crack of a ladle. Your bowl empties. The bread is gone. The sausage has left grease on your fingers that you lick away shamelessly. But you're not full yet, not completely. The woman reappears with a plate of fried smelts, their tiny bodies curled, crisp, bones edible. You pop 3 in your mouth before she even leaves, the crunch loud, the taste sharp with vinegar. This is Venice, fish even when you don't expect it. You chew and think about how the church's rules have carved themselves into appetites. Fish might have started as penance, but tonight these smelts feel like a blessing. The tavern hum deepens as the night presses on. Dice clatter on the far table. Someone shouts at losing, someone else at winning. Wine flows thicker, and voices rise with it. You lean back, stretching your legs, and consider dessert. It won't be much, not here, but perhaps a slice of cheese or dried figs. And indeed, a platter comes. Hard cheese with a rind tough enough to break a knife, yet inside sharp and crumbly. You snap off a piece and let it dissolve on your tongue. Then you grab a fig, sticky and sweet, the seeds crackling between your teeth. Together, cheese and fig make a pair almost poetic, salty, sweet, rough, soft. A fitting end. Except, of course, it's not the end. Supper always bleeds into drinking, and drinking always bleeds into stories. The sailor next to you nudges, pours you a cup, and begins recounting his latest voyage. Storms in the Adriatic, a sea monster near Crete, cargo stolen by pirates. You nod and smile, though you suspect half of it is lies. But lies taste good with wine, and tonight the jug is full. The tavern's heat wraps around you like a cloak. Your stomach hums contentedly, heavy with soup, bread, sausage, fish, cheese, figs, and more wine than you planned. You know you should rise, return to your warehouse, finish the ledger. But instead, you let yourself melt into the bench, the music, the chatter, the smell of onions and grease and wood smoke. Another quirky tidbit drifts through your wine-clouded mind. Some swore garlic kept evil spirits away. You recall the garlic-heavy stew earlier and chuckle softly. If that's true, tonight this tavern is the safest place in Venice. Time passes unmeasured. You've eaten, laughed, listened, even sung a little under your breath. And when at last you rise, the room sways gently. Whether from wine or the lagoon, you can't say. You step outside, the night air sharp against your flushed face, the moon a pale coin above the rooftops. Supper has ended, but the story of the day still moves forward. You pat your stomach, heavier now, and start the walk home along narrow Cali. The taste of figs lingers on your tongue, sweet as memory, and you know tomorrow the rhythm will repeat. Hunger, market, snack, supper, story. But tonight, you're full enough to face whatever dawn brings. Morning again. You rise with the water's hush against stone, but your body carries the heaviness of last night's tavern feast. Your tongue feels furry, your head thick with the memory of sour wine, and your belly protests the weight of barley, sausage, and figs. Still, the city doesn't pause for anyone, not even for a merchant with an aching gut. The first task of the day isn't prayer, nor counting coins, nor checking warehouse locks. It's asking the simple question, what shall I eat today? That question, for Venetians, always sits on a knife's edge. Not because of famine, you live in one of the wealthiest cities of Europe, but because the flavors that parade through your life are tied to fragile threads: ships, winds, wars, taxes. One missed cargo from Alexandria, and cinnamon disappears. One pirate ambush in the Aegean, and pepper triples in price. You don't control food, food controls you. Today begins with weak wine again, watered down, alongside a heel of bread rubbed with garlic. The garlic stings your mouth, but clears your head. You tear at the loaf, each bite stiff, crust scraping your gums. Nothing luxurious, but it steadies you enough to face the market. You step outside. Venice in daylight feels almost edible itself. The scent of the lagoon, briny and sour, mixing with roasting chestnuts sold by street vendors. Salt clings to your lips before you've even crossed the first bridge. At the Rialto, the world of food reveals itself like a tapestry. Pyramids of oranges, their skin glistening, mounds of almonds in rough sacks, barrels of dried figs, raisins, dates. Overhead, gulls cry as fishmongers shout their wares. Tuna, eels, anchovies, squid, all flopping or gleaming on crushed ice. Some stalls smell of smoke from drying fish, others of brine from pickled ones. You pause before a crate of peppercorns. Tiny, round, black, they seem unremarkable. Yet each one is worth its weight in silver. You pinch a few, let them roll in your palm. You think of last night's sausage, how 1 or 2 grains transformed ground pork into fire. That's the power of the exotic imports, small, yet world-changing. Nearby, cinnamon sticks, curled tight as scrolls. A woman examines them, sniffing, haggling. Cloves, nutmeg, ginger. Each spice a whisper from faraway lands, carried on months of perilous voyages. To a Venetian, they are not simply condiments. They are proof that the city commands the world. You purchase a small pouch of pepper, enough to season your table for a month, and tuck it into your belt. The merchant counts the coins twice before letting go. You wonder if he suspects you'll resell it at a markup. For isn't that what Venice does best? Buy cheap, sell dear? Back home, you grind a little pepper into the day's midday meal. Boiled beans with onions, thickened with olive oil. The pepper stings your nose, sharp and exotic, elevating humble beans into something that feels important. You chew, imagining yourself not in your kitchen, but at the crossroads of continents. Here lies the truth. Spices were status. Anyone could eat beans, bread, cheese. But sprinkle pepper? Add cinnamon to wine? That was a performance of power, a way of saying, I have connections, I trade across oceans, I belong to the city that rules the seas. You sip your spiced beans slowly, savoring their bite, and think about how Venice has transformed your very tongue into a stage. But the market doesn't stop at beans or spices. Fruits dazzle too, especially when they come from beyond Italy's borders. You recall yesterday's pomegranates displayed like red lanterns. Crack one open and the seeds spill like rubies, staining fingers, tongues, even the tablecloth. Guests gasp at such fruits, less for taste than spectacle. Dates from the Levant are soft and sugary, sticking to teeth like honey. Oranges, when sliced, release a brightness that cuts through the heavy stews of beans and barley. These are not daily foods, no. They arrive in crates, sometimes half-rotten from the journey, always expensive. But when they do arrive, they dazzle. This afternoon, you treat yourself to figs stuffed with almonds, then rolled in honey. Sticky, yes, but worth it. The figs melt on your tongue, the almond crunch follows, and the honey drips into your beard. A passerby glances, perhaps envious, perhaps judgmental, but you don't care. In Venice, eating well is as much display as satisfaction. Here's the quirky truth. Many believed exotic fruits had medicinal powers. Oranges against scurvy, though they didn't know the word yet. Dates to warm the body. Pomegranates to purify blood. Food wasn't just sustenance. It was cure, talisman, proof of wealth. You lean against a column by the canal, nibbling your honeyed figs, watching barges unload more crates of goods from beyond the Adriatic. Sailors curse, merchants argue, gulls scream. But all you taste is the world, condensed into sticky sweetness. The day winds on, and hunger will rise again. You know tonight might bring another tavern meal, another bowl of soup or plate of fish. But what lingers is the thought of how fragile it all is. One storm, one war, one embargo, and no figs, no pepper, no cinnamon. Venice walks a knife edge between plenty and scarcity, and you, as a merchant, walk it too. For now, though, you have pepper in your pouch and figs in your teeth. And that feels like enough. The midday bells echo across the canals, their sound softened by the lagoon's damp air. And your stomach reminds you that it has been several hours since the beans, bread, and figs. Now the question rises again. What to eat when coin is precious, the market spices costly, and the body demands fuel not flourish? You know the answer before you ask. It's stew. Always stew. The humble, dependable, endlessly recycled dish that has warmed Venetian bellies for centuries. If the spice market is Venice's crown, then stew is its backbone. You return to your kitchen, such as it is, a modest space, a hearth blackened by years of smoke, a few pots that have seen generations of boiling, scraping, seasoning, and scorching. The fire is coaxed alive again with driftwood and scraps of kindling. The iron pot, squat and heavy, sits atop the flames like a trusted companion. Today's stew begins not with meat, but with water. You pour it in, watching the steam rise, carrying the scent of smoke. Into that goes yesterday's leftovers, a hunk of barley bread, too hard to bite but perfect for soaking. It dissolves slowly, thickening the broth. You chop onions, their sharpness filling the air, and throw them in. A few beans from the previous night follow, soft and swollen, breaking apart in the boil. The result is no feast, no dish for guests or for boasting. But it is food that sustains, stretches, and comforts. A Venetian merchant may taste pepper and cinnamon on rare days, but his daily strength comes from this. Vegetables boiled down into something that clings to your ribs. You stir, the wooden spoon scraping the bottom, and you remember the saying that kitchens share. A stew pot is never truly empty. Even when scraped bare, some flavor lingers, mingles with tomorrow's meal, and the one after. Historians still argue whether this practice was deliberate or simply a result of necessity, but in either case, it meant continuity. Meals flowed one into another, each pot a living memory of the week's hunger and plenty. You taste the broth. It is earthy, plain. You crumble in some dried herbs, a pinch of thyme, perhaps oregano. Nothing imported, nothing costly, just what grows in small gardens or window boxes. The aroma lifts, faint but welcome, transforming brown water into something resembling cuisine. Here is a truth. Peasants across Italy survived on similar fare, yet in Venice the stew carries a hint of difference. Because even the humblest kitchens sometimes received fragments of the exotic. A sailor cousin might bring home a scrap of dried ginger, tossed in to warm the blood, or a pinch of pepper might fall from the pouch of a generous employer. Thus, in your bowl, the world might appear in miniature, hidden inside the onions and barley. You sit to eat, dipping coarse bread into the thickened broth, letting it soak until the crust softens. The stew clings, heavy with beans and greens. It isn't glamorous, but it quiets the gnawing in your belly, and you feel your body straighten with gratitude. As you chew, you can't help reflecting on how stew is a mirror of Venetian society. The wealthy merchants dine on roast fish scented with saffron, sweet pastries dusted with sugar, capons stewed in almond milk. Meanwhile, the common folk stretch beans and onions as far as possible. Yet all use the same pot, the same fire, the same principle. Take what you have, boil it down, feed yourself. The difference lies in what goes in. A quirky tidbit floats in your mind as you slurp another spoonful. Some Venetians swore by adding snail shells into the broth for strength. Others insisted a dried fish tail stirred thrice clockwise could ward off illness. Food was sustenance, but also superstition. You wonder how many of your own aches and sniffles have been soothed by little more than hot water and belief. The fire crackles, the pot bubbles, the city hums outside. Through your small window, you glimpse neighbors doing the same. Pots on hearths, children clutching bowls, old women dipping bread. The sound of stews being ladled is nearly as common as the sound of church bells. And yet, Venice is not so simple. You remember again that stew can shift into extravagance with a single ingredient. A scrap of salted pork dropped into the pot sends smoky richness swirling. A handful of dried fish, bought cheap at the Rialto, adds depth. Even chestnuts, ground into flour and whisked into the broth, turn it creamy and sweet. Every addition is a gamble between cost and comfort. As evening nears, you prepare for another meal. The stew, left to bubble all afternoon, has thickened further, flavors deepening with every hour. You ladle it into a bowl, the steam fogging your face, and carry it to the table. Alone or with family, it is the same ritual, dipping, blowing, tasting, chewing, sighing. This is not a dish to impress. It is a dish to endure. And yet, you can't deny its quiet magic. It gathers scraps, rejects, leftovers, and turns them into life. It connects today with yesterday, hunger with memory, survival with hope. As you swallow the last spoonful, you wonder, when historians look back on Venice, will they write more of peppercorns traded for fortunes, or of these humble pots of beans and barley? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. Historians still argue whether daily meals reveal more about a society than its grand feasts. But you, belly full, know the truth in your bones. Stew is the real empire, built one ladle at a time. The pot, half full, sits ready for tomorrow. Because tomorrow, again, there will be stew. The bowl is rinsed, the pot scraped, and the coals left glowing under ash. But your stomach, though calmed, isn't quite convinced the meal is over. And why should it be? A Venetian merchant knows the day isn't complete without something sweet. Something that feels like a small reward after trudging through the salt, spice, and sweat of the marketplace. Dessert, of course, doesn't mean gelato or tiramisu. Those lie centuries in the future. What it does mean, here in the 14th century, is fruit, honey, nuts, and the occasional miracle of sugar. Sugar is still a rarity, a treasure brought across the sea from Cyprus or the Levant, often pressed into cakes or crystals so precious they're locked away like jewels. You can only afford a little. But oh, when it appears, it feels like a glimpse of heaven. Tonight, though, you settle for figs again. They're dried, wrinkled, sticky with natural sugars. You tear one open and chew slowly. Its seeds crunch faintly between your teeth, the flavor rich and earthy. Figs are Venice's quiet delight, easy to transport, easy to keep, endlessly sweet. A few almonds crack between your fingers, their skins bitter, but their cores smooth and nutty. You alternate bites, fig, almond, fig, almond. Simple, rhythmic, almost meditative. Still, you remember what a true sweet can be. Not long ago, a friend invited you to a feast where candied pine nuts were passed around on silver plates, each one coated in a thin, glistening shell of sugar, they caught the lamplight like pearls. You can still feel the crunch of the outer layer, the soft give of the nut inside. It was luxury in miniature, a single bite worth more than your day's stew. Historians still argue whether sugar in this era was considered a spice, a medicine, or a luxury food. The truth is it was all three. Doctors recommended it for weak stomachs. Cooks treated it as spice, seasoning dishes both savory and sweet. And merchants, of course, treated it as pure profit. To you, it is simply wonder crystallized, too expensive for daily indulgence, but unforgettable when tasted. You finish your figs, wishing just for a drizzle of honey. Honey is more accessible than sugar, gathered from hives kept even on the rooftops of Venetian houses. Imagine that, buzzing above the canals, bees ferry nectar into waxy chambers, unaware that their labor is destined to sweeten merchant tables. A spoonful of honey transforms bread into dessert, softens cheese, or even, if you're daring, finds its way into stew. Tonight, though, your cupboard is bare. No honey, only memory. Still, fruit itself carries power. Grapes dried into raisins, pears stewed in wine, apples baked in ashes until their skins split and steam poured from their flesh. These are your comforts. Nothing grand, but enough to make the body sigh in satisfaction. You remember a quirky tale from the market. A seller swore his dried dates were blessed by a desert hermit and could cure melancholy if eaten with walnuts. Another claimed his candied orange peel could make a man irresistible to women. Did you buy them? Perhaps once, half out of curiosity, half out of hope. Did it work? Well, let's just say you're still single and still chewing figs. The sweetness lingers, soft and fleeting, and your body relaxes. Dessert isn't just about taste, it's about signal. It tells your stomach, the day is done. The meal is finished. You can rest now. Even if the figs are humble, even if sugar is rare, the effect is the same. Through your window, you hear the faint echo of laughter from a wealthy house nearby. No doubt their table gleams with trays of candied almonds, jellies molded in ornate shapes, and wafers pressed with honey. You could feel envy, but instead you feel curiosity. Would those sweets truly satisfy more than your figs? Or is sweetness sweeter because it is scarce? Historians still debate whether Venetian merchants developed a taste for sugar gradually, or whether its sudden influx reshaped the entire palate of Europe. You, however, think it might just be that scarcity is the finest spice. You lick the last bit of fig from your fingers, the sugar sticky against your skin. A jug of water is poured, and you wash it down cool and plain. The sweetness fades, leaving warmth in its place. Dessert has ended. And yet, there's one more ritual waiting. Wine. But not just for pleasure. Wine as necessity, as daily habit, as health and superstition all in one. The figs sit heavy in your stomach, the almonds crunch in memory, and you reach for the jug. Because in Venice, dessert is not always the end. Sometimes, it is only the pause before the cup. The jug sits cool in your hand, clay damp from the evening air. You pull the cork with a soft pop, and the faint scent of sour fruit rises to meet you. Wine red cloudy, not the shimmering ruby you imagine from a noble's goblet, but something rougher, something honest. And yet, it is yours, and tonight it completes the meal. In Venice, water is rarely trusted. Wells draw from cisterns that collect rain, but even those can taste stale or sour after a long summer. The canals. Please, unless you want to drink brine, fish guts, and a pinch of whatever your neighbor dumped in earlier. No, wine is safer, and besides, it carries with it a comfort that water rarely does. You tip the jug into a cup, wooden not glass, because glass is for customers or for display, not for you at home. The liquid pours heavy, unfiltered, a swirl of murky garnet. You sip, and it's tart thin, almost vinegary. And that's fine. Wine in the 14th century isn't about perfection, it's about preservation. Even spoiled wine can be revived with water or spices. Sometimes you drink it straight, harsh as it may be. Other nights you mix it. 1 part wine, 2 parts water. That makes it stretch further and softens the bite. Tonight you've earned it unwatered. Your figs deserve a strong companion. The first mouthful warms your throat, coiling into your chest. You lean back and exhale. Merchants across Venice, from the richest silk broker to the humblest apprentice, share this moment daily. Wine is democratic in that sense. It may not taste the same for all, but everyone drinks it. You remember when a shipment of Greek wine came in, thicker, sweeter, flavored almost like resin. It sold fast, gobbled up by the wealthy, who praised its exotic bouquet. You managed to snag a small flask from a friend in the docks, and you still recall the honey-like finish. Tonight's Venetian brew doesn't quite compare, but you smile. Not every cup needs to taste like ambrosia. Sometimes it just needs to taste alive. Historians still argue whether medieval Venetians drank more wine out of necessity or out of habit. You suspect the answer is both. Necessity kept you safe from waterborne disease. Habit kept you comfortable when the day stretched long and the work unrelenting. And truthfully, after a long dinner of bread and stew, what else could settle the belly but wine? There are quirky touches, too. A friend once swore by dropping rosemary sprigs into his jug, claiming it cured headaches and kept the wine young. Another merchant mixed in cinnamon and clove, imported from Alexandria, to make his humble red taste like something royal. You tried it once, but the spice overwhelmed the drink. Still, the memory lingers, wine glowing with fire, like drinking liquid perfume. You take another sip, imagining the scholars of Padua, who insist wine strengthens the humors if consumed moderately. Moderately, of course, is always a flexible word. Tonight, moderately means 2 cups, maybe 3. It depends how easily the figs settle. The candlelight flickers on your table, casting the liquid into a deep crimson glow. You swirl it absently, watching tiny bits of grape skin cling to the sides of the cup. Somewhere nearby, you hear a chorus of voices. Sailors drinking in the tavern, laughter spilling into the alley. Their wine will be rougher than yours, cut with water until barely recognizable. Yet their joy will be louder. You think of the wealthy merchant's table again, his crystal goblet brimming with pale white wine from Crete, imported at ridiculous cost. Sweet, delicate, perfumed with the sun of the Aegean. Would he savor it more than you savor your rough Venetian red? Or does wine, like figs, taste sweeter when it's rare, when it's earned? Your jug grows lighter. You sip slowly now, not wanting the warmth to end too quickly. Dessert soothed you, but wine carries you. It eases the muscles in your shoulders, slows the rush of your thoughts. It is more than drink, it is lullaby. And so the meal fades, sweetness giving way to wine, and wine dissolving into drowsiness. But your night is not finished. Because tomorrow waits, with its markets and its chaos, and tonight must prepare you for it. After wine comes ritual, those quiet habits that close the day and set you adrift towards sleep. The jug empties with a sigh. You set it down gently, and listen as the city exhales with you. The tide shifting against stone, voices thinning in the alleys, shutters closing against the night. One last sip, one last swallow. The meal is over. But the day, though tired, has a final chapter still to tell. The wine has left a soft buzz in your head, warm but not heavy, like a wool blanket that's been draped around your shoulders. The jug rests empty now, its clay sides faintly sticky where the liquid caught and dribbled down. Dessert has melted into memory, and the last traces of figs linger on your tongue, a whisper of sweetness behind the tart aftertaste of wine. You sigh, lean back, and let your eyes wander. This is the quiet moment, the part of the day that always feels stolen, as if you've tricked the clock into giving you a few extra breaths before the world resumes its relentless march. Every merchant in Venice has a way of closing the day. Yours is modest. Wipe the table, bank the coals, lock the shutters. Rituals that keep chaos at bay, tiny anchors in a sea of uncertainty. You know tomorrow could bring anything: spoiled cargo, sudden storms, a rival who undercuts your price by half. But tonight, these small motions are yours to command. You start with the table. The crusts of bread get swept aside, tucked into a cloth that will be shaken for the birds come morning. You don't waste food if you can help it, not even hardened crumbs. A merchant's life is about margins, and waste eats at margins faster than moths at wool. The stew pot still sits near the hearth, faintly steaming. You ladle what remains into a smaller crock, cover it with a wooden lid, and place it near the window where the cool night air drifts through. Tomorrow it may be breakfast, or part of a hasty lunch if business drags you into the piazza early. You smile at the thought that stew rarely tastes worse the next day. In fact, it often tastes better, as if the ingredients have finally agreed to get along. Historians still argue whether Venetians thought much about food safety beyond "don't let it rot." Maybe they didn't. You, however, trust your nose and your stomach, both reliable companions. The stew will keep until the morning, and if it doesn't, well, you'll know quickly enough. Then there are the coals. You take the poker, shift them carefully until only a faint glow remains. Fire is a double-edged sword in a city of wood and cloth. One spark too many, one merchant too careless, and half a neighborhood could go up in flames before dawn. You've seen it before. Charred beams jutting like ribs, neighbors weeping as smoke curled into the sky. Tonight you're careful. A merchant without a home is a merchant undone. The shutters come last. You push them closed, sliding the wooden bar across with a thud. Outside, the sounds of Venice soften. The calls of late drinkers echoing through narrow alleys, the slap of water against stone, the faint cry of gulls still awake and circling the harbor. Once the bar is down, the room feels sealed, cocooned against the night. Quirky habits sneak in here, too. Some merchants hang garlic near the shutters, swearing it wards off both thieves and evil spirits. You never bought that entirely, but you admit the smell keeps the flies away. Others sprinkle salt across the threshold, another invisible barrier against whatever the darkness hides. You simply trust the bar and the bolt. That, and your neighbor's loud dog. With each motion, your body loosens, your mind settling into its final rhythm. This is not just cleaning. It is ceremony. Without these steps, you feel restless, as though some part of the day remains unfinished. With them, you ease into stillness, ready to let sleep carry you away. There's one more ritual, though, the most personal of all. You reach for a small wooden chest tucked beneath the table. The lock is simple, the metal worn, but the contents are not valuable enough to tempt most thieves. Inside are coins, small earnings, carefully counted, wrapped in cloth. You open the chest, lift the cloth, and let your eyes linger on the dull gleam of copper and the faint glint of silver. Today's gains were modest. 2 sales in the market, 1 promise of credit, 1 payment collected. Enough to keep you steady, but not enough to make you sing. You add 2 coins to the pile, stacking them carefully, then run your finger across the rest. This is your pulse, your breath, your heart in physical form. A merchant without coin is no merchant at all. And yet you remember. Coin is not food, coin is not shelter, coin cannot be chewed when you are hungry. It is a promise, nothing more, a fragile one at that. Tomorrow, it may slip through your hands as quickly as the wine did tonight. Historians still argue whether medieval Venetians measured wealth more in land, coin, or reputation. You believe it is reputation. Coin feeds you today, but reputation feeds you tomorrow, the day after, and all the uncertain years to come. Reputation is why others trade with you, why they trust your word, why they extend credit instead of turning away. The chest closes with a soft snap. You slide it back beneath the table, where it will wait until morning. Your eyes drift around the room one last time. The fire glows faint, the shutters are barred, the chest is hidden. The table is clear, save for the empty jug and the faint aroma of figs and stew that lingers like perfume. You inhale deeply, then exhale, letting the day's weight roll off your shoulders. And then slowly you stand. Your knees pop, your back aches a little. It is not age, it is labor. Carrying, bending, haggling, walking across the uneven stones of Rialto. These are the aches of a merchant's life, not yet crippling, but always whispering at the edges of your strength. You stretch, arms wide, and feel the joints loosen. This, too, is ritual, your body signaling that it has survived another day. And then you move toward the sleeping corner. Tonight, like so many nights before, You will lie down with the taste of figs still sweet, the echo of wine still warm, the memory of stew still clinging to your senses. Ritual complete. Day sealed. Night unfolding. The city may roar outside, the tides may shift, fortune may spin its wheel in unpredictable arcs. But here, within your shutters and beneath your roof, you are still. And tomorrow, when dawn bleeds gold across the canals, the whole dance will begin again. The pallet waits for you in the corner, low and humble, stuffed with straw that crunches faintly when you press it with your hand. A rough woolen blanket lies folded at its foot, heavy enough to keep the damp at bay, light enough not to suffocate you when the nights turn warm. You have no feather bed, no embroidered silks, none of the luxuries that noble families stretch out on in their palaces along the Grand Canal. Yet here, in this small room with its shuttered windows and banked coals, this bed feels as grand as any throne. You ease yourself down, first sitting, then stretching out, boots kicked aside, but hose still clinging to your legs. There's no ceremony here, no disrobing as if a servant waits with scented oils and warmed linens. You simply collapse, the day's weight carrying you into the straw. And instantly, the ache in your knees, your back, even your fingertips loosens. The body knows this place. It sighs into it. Still, you do not close your eyes. Not yet. There is the pillow ritual, thin, flattened, but yours. You plump it once with your fist, though it never really changes. You turn it over, cool side up, and rest your head. The faint smell of straw mixes with old wool and smoke from the hearth. It is not unpleasant. It is the smell of lived life, of survival. Historians still argue whether Venetian merchants slept alone, with family, or in shared dormitories above their shops. The truth likely depends on wealth, space, and luck. Tonight, you sleep alone. The neighbors are only one wall away, but in your small corner, there is only the steady rhythm of your own breath. From here, the world shifts. Lying down changes perspective. The ceiling beams above seem to press closer, their shadows long in the faint firelight. The shuttered window becomes a dark square, like an unfinished painting. You hear sounds differently now. The water lapping beneath the foundations, the muted laughter of drunk sailors staggering home, the distant creak of rope on a mast that never quite sleeps. Venice is alive even now, restless, its heart beating through stone, wood, and water. You think of tomorrow, briefly. You picture the stalls of Rialto Market, baskets piled with dried beans, slabs of salted fish, bolts of cloth that smell faintly of dye. You imagine the noise, the haggling, the sweat of men arguing over a handful of coin. Then you let the thought drift away. Tomorrow will come whether you prepare for it or not. Tonight, you give yourself to the straw and the wool and the faint warmth of your own body. Quirky superstition creeps in here too. Some Venetians tuck a small charm beneath their pillows, an amulet against bad dreams, a scrap of parchment with a saint's name, even a sprig of rosemary. You don't bother. Your charm is the chest of coins beneath the table. If dreams turn sour, you remind yourself you survived another day. That's protection enough. Sleep does not come all at once. You linger in that in-between place where thoughts float like lanterns on a dark canal. You remember the stew, its taste still on your tongue. You remember the figs, how sticky your fingers felt. You remember the wine, how it blurred the hard edges of your mood. Each memory softens into the next, until they become less thought and more sensation. Historians still argue whether medieval people slept in one long stretch, or in two segments, first sleep and second sleep, broken by a wakeful hour in the middle of the night. You wonder if that's what will happen to you tonight. Will you wake at midnight, sit up, tend the coals, maybe sip leftover stew before lying down again? Or will you sink straight through, unbroken, like a stone slipping to the bottom of a lagoon? You shift once, pulling the wool blanket higher over your chest. The room is cooling quickly, the last glow of the hearth fading. But the blanket traps your heat, and your body grows heavier, warmer. Outside, the laughter has dwindled, replaced by the hush of water and the occasional bark of a dog. Even Venice has a bedtime. The merchant's life is always precarious, always uncertain. And yet here, beneath your wool blanket on a bed of straw, you are safe for now. The shutters are barred. The coins are hidden. The stew will wait until morning. The day is finished, fully sealed, filed away in memory. You close your eyes, and for the first time all day, there is silence. Not the silence of a shuttered room, not the silence of a quiet street, but the silence that lives inside your chest when all your burdens finally, blessedly, loosen their grip. The bed holds you. The darkness accepts you. The night carries you away. The darkness holds you, yet it is not a dead, empty silence. It's a layered quiet, a tapestry woven from faint threads of sound. At first, there is only your breath, slow and uneven as you drift. Then, gradually, your ears begin to catch what seeps through the shutters and the cracks in the plaster. Venice never truly sleeps, and from your palate you can sense her heartbeat. A soft lapping of water presses against the wooden pilings beneath your room. It is rhythmic, like the rocking of a cradle. Then a muffled splash, the oar of a lone gondolier guiding his vessel home through dark canals. His voice hums low, perhaps a tune to himself, perhaps a prayer. You cannot make out the words, but the melody threads itself into your drifting thoughts. Historians still argue whether gondoliers of the 14th century sang to pass the time or remained silent to avoid attracting thieves. Whatever the truth, you swear you hear something like a tune floating upward tonight, half lullaby, half dirge, carried on the damp air. You turn on your pallet, shifting the straw beneath you with a soft crunch. The blanket slips lower, and cool night air brushes your cheek. You pull it back up, cocooning yourself again, though the smell of smoke and wool clings to your nose. Then a different sound. Farther away, across water you cannot see, a bell tolls. 1, 2, 3 for measured notes. Midnight, or perhaps some later hour, marked by a church that has no mercy on sleepers. The sound rolls slowly, each strike reverberating across the lagoon, softened by fog. You picture the bell swinging, bronze catching torchlight, its vibrations trembling down to you where you lie. For a while, nothing but silence follows. You start to sink deeper, heavy and numb, when the barking of a dog tears the stillness. Short, sharp bursts, echoing through the alleys. You frown in your half-sleep, annoyed. The dog knows something. Perhaps a rat scrambling across the stones, or a stranger lingering where he should not. Dogs are guardians in this city of narrow walkways and hidden corners, even when their masters sleep. Quirky tidbit. Some Venetians believed that a dog's bark at night warned of spirits drifting through the streets, restless souls that hadn't been properly prayed for. You imagine, in your drowsy mind, a pale figure gliding through the alleys, ignored by everyone except one sharp-eared hound. A shiver runs down your arms, though you are not sure if it is from fear or the chill. You close your eyes again, but the night insists on speaking. There is laughter, faint, distant. The sailors again, though fewer this time. Their voices are broken, stumbling, like the clink of cups after too much wine. They sing off-key, about a woman or a wager lost. One curses loudly, and the others hush him. Soon their voices fade, swallowed by the twisting alleys. You smile, half asleep, at the thought. Even in this late hour, life seeps through the cracks of Venice like water through stone. The city is porous, impossible to seal away. Then, unexpectedly, the scuttle of something near your palate. You stiffen. A mouse? Likely. They live in the straw, scurrying boldest when the fire dies down. You turn, thump your hand once against the floor, and the sound scurries away into the dark. Sleep tugs at you again, and this time you surrender without fight. Historians still argue whether the constant damp and vermin of Venetian homes were tolerated or actively battled. The truth is probably both. Tonight, you choose to ignore them, letting your mind float above the straw, above the room, above the noises. In this in-between place, you dream, or half-dream. You see the lagoon, dark and endless. You are floating, not in a boat, but on the water itself. The bells toll again, their sound vibrating through the black waves. You cannot tell if you are awake or asleep, but it doesn't matter. The city hums around you, a lullaby of splashes, voices, and creaking wood. Slowly, slowly, everything fades. The barking dog, the gondolier's hum, even the faint squeak of a mouse. You drift at last into the deeper dark, where no sound reaches. Only your breathing, steady now, marking the passage of hours. The night holds you. The city sings you to sleep. And for a while there is nothing. You wake with a heaviness that clings to your eyelids. Morning in Venice is never abrupt. No rooster's crow cutting the dark, no sudden blaze of sun pouring through shutters. Instead, it seeps in quietly, like ink through parchment. A pale, silvery light nudges the edges of your window shutters, and you hear it before you see it. The city stretching, groaning, and yawning awake. The first sound is always water. A gondola glides by, its hull brushing the canal wall, wood against stone, like the scrape of a bow on a cello string. A call follows, deep and resonant. "Oe!" A greeting tossed across the water to another boatman. Their words echo oddly between buildings, as though the city itself is speaking back. Your body aches from the straw pallet, and when you sit, joints pop in protest. You rub your face, catching the smell of yesterday's smoke still clinging to your hair. In the room, faint shafts of morning light stab through the shutter's cracks, dust motes turning in their glow. You rise and open the window. Immediately, the air rushes in damp, salty, tinged with fish and smoke. The lagoon's breath, carrying both promise and rot. You lean on the sill, looking down. Below, the canal reflects a fractured sky, and barges already move, flat-bottomed boats piled high with goods. You spot a man unloading baskets of fruit, figs, apples, pears. Another lifts sacks of flour from a rocking boat to a narrow dock. His back muscles nod as he heaves, his curses louder than the gulls circling overhead. The gulls, of course, are everywhere, swooping, calling, fighting over scraps. One lands boldly on a roof beam, head cocked as if daring the city to notice it. Their cries mix with the creak of pulleys, the splash of oars, the call of vendors. Venice wakes not with a whisper, but with a layered chorus. Historians still argue whether mornings in medieval Venice began earlier than in countryside villages, but given the bustle of trade, most agree the city was alive before dawn. You feel it now, that sense of constant motion, of lives already well underway while you are still rubbing sleep from your eyes. The smells shift as you lean out farther. Bread. Yes, unmistakable. Somewhere close, perhaps 2 streets over, a baker has cracked open his oven. The scent drifts through alleys, mixing with wood smoke, sweet yeast and crust mingling into an aroma that makes your stomach growl. Imagine a round loaf, hot enough to burn fingers, torn apart with steam curling skyward. It will be on tables soon, dipped in oil or spread with soft cheese. A quirky tidbit. In Venice, bakers were once required by law to sell loaves at a fixed weight and price to prevent famine profiteering. Some, ever inventive, hollowed the bread slightly or baked with extra air, cheating customers by the ounce. You wonder if the baker you smell is honest, or if his loaves are half smoke and puff. On the street below, women sweep their thresholds. The rhythmic sweep of brooms joins the clatter of shutters thrown open. Children chase one another already, their bare feet slapping against stone, their laughter piercing through the layered noise. Then comes the vendor's song. One bellows about fresh fish, his accent thick with the lagoon's rhythm. Another sings of greens, onions, herbs, beans, his voice almost operatic. Each competes with the others, crafting chants and melodies to draw attention, turning commerce into performance. To your half-woken mind, it's like a market choir warming up. Historians still argue whether these street cries had a regulated tune or were improvised daily. Whatever the truth, this morning you hear them rising and colliding, music made from necessity and noise. Yawn stretching. Behind you, the fire pit is cold, last night's ashes gray and soft. Your stomach reminds you that morning hunger is a sharper beast than evening weariness. You reach for your cloak, feeling its ruff will scratch your wrists. The city outside is already moving, already eating. You'd better join it. But for a moment longer, you linger at the sill, watching. You see an old man with a net slung over his shoulder, trudging toward the canal. A woman balancing a basket of eggs, headscarf tied tight against the morning chill. A pair of boys running with a dog that barks with wild joy. The city is alive, a great organism, and you are one cell within it. The bells begin again, not the solemn midnight toll, but the crisp chime of morning hours. Their notes spill across rooftops, calling merchants to their stalls, clerks to their ledgers, bakers to their ovens, gondoliers to their oars. The sound is sharp, confident, commanding. The city listens, adjusts, obeys. You close the shutters softly and breathe in the last trace of bread and brine. Your day is about to begin. The city has woken you, whether you are ready or not. Your feet carry you down the worn wooden stairs, each step creaking like an old man's sigh. The stairwell smells of damp plaster and yesterday's garlic, a combination that makes you wrinkle your nose even as your stomach rumbles. When you finally shove open the heavy door, the morning explodes around you. Venice never tiptoes into your senses, it barges in. The air tastes like salt and wood smoke, with undertones of rotting algae and fish guts. Somewhere nearby, a barrel of wine has been opened, its sharp tang competing with the bakery 2 doors down. The bakery wins. The scent of warm bread snakes through the alley like a thief, curling around your head, tugging you along. You step into the narrow street, hem of your cloak brushing puddles left by high tide. Sunlight filters weakly through the tight corridor of houses, gilding only the highest window shutters. The lower stones are slick, green in patches from years of water lapping at them. Venice is not a city of grandeur in this moment. It is a city of stains, sweat, and steaming mouths demanding food. You shuffle toward the market square. Around the corner, the space opens like a sudden gasp. The Rialto market is already alive. Merchants shout over each other, gestures as wide as sails, each voice straining to drown the rest. To your right, the fishmongers. Their tables are slabs of damp wood, piled with silver eels twisting like spilled rope, heaps of sardines glinting in the pale light, and great, glassy-eyed tuna staring up at the heavens as though asking for a redo. Crushed ice is sprinkled over some stalls, hauled in from the mountains days earlier, melting too quickly in the warmth. The floor is slick, the air heavy with brine. Gulls shriek overhead, diving and retreating, hoping for a careless scrap. You pause. A man in a leather apron, sleeves rolled high, slaps an octopus onto the table, its arms spreading outward like a map of rivers. He grins, knife flashing. His voice is thick Venetian, loud, confident. Fresh. Straight from the lagoon. Who else sells you arms that still twitch? The crowd presses in, hands bargaining, pointing, wrangling prices. You edge past, careful of your shoes on the slick stones. To your left, the vegetable stalls. Pyramids of onions, carrots with clumps of earth still clinging to their roots, herbs tied in fragrant bundles. A girl barely 12 stands on tiptoe, hawking bunches of parsley in a sing-song voice. Behind her, her father rearranges cabbages as though they were gems, stacking them higher to appear abundant. And at the center, bread. The bakery stall is a shrine, loaves stacked high in baskets lined with linen cloth. Rounds, long batons, little rolls speckled with sesame. Their crusts range from pale gold to deep brown, some dusted with flour, others brushed with oil. The smell hits you in the chest, warmth, comfort, a softness you can taste even before your lips touch it. You move closer, drawn by instinct. The baker is a broad woman with forearms thick from kneading dough. She sees you, nods, tears a heel off a loaf, and presses it into your hand before you can even ask. Hot, she warns, voice gravelly. She isn't lying. Steam curls from the bread as you lift it, fingers burning slightly. You bite, the crust crackling, the inside soft as clouds. It fills your mouth with warmth, salt, and yeast, a simplicity that feels almost holy after the night's thin gruel. You chew slowly, eyes closing a moment. A quirky tidbit. Venetian bakers were once so vital that during famine, the government sometimes forced them to remain open even when grain supplies dwindled. Soldiers were dispatched to escort flour to ovens, ensuring bread reached the city before anything else. Imagine soldiers guarding baguettes more fiercely than gold. You lick crumbs from your fingers, glance around. Everywhere you look, the market is a storm. Merchants wave eels like flags, women jab fingers at sellers with sharp words, coins clink, dogs dart beneath stalls snatching fallen scraps. You step aside just in time to avoid a donkey hauling sacks of flour, its hooves clattering on stone. The man leading it curses, sweat shining on his brow. Historians still argue whether the Rialto market was the noisiest in all Europe, but standing here, you're tempted to believe it. The air itself seems swollen with human energy, rising and falling in waves of shouts and laughter. A stall catches your eye, spices. A narrow table, guarded by a wiry man with a thin beard and sharp eyes. He leans close to customers, his voice hushed compared to the bellowing fishmongers. In small wooden boxes sit treasures, black pepper, cinnamon sticks, cloves. Their smell cuts through the fish and bread, sharp, foreign, dizzying. You edge nearer, catching a whiff of saffron, its price nearly equal to gold. Yet here it sits in a small folded paper, guarded as though it might sprout legs and flee. The merchant winks at you, whispers, "For you a taste." He lifts a pinch of cinnamon, holds it beneath your nose. Sweet, sharp, mysterious. For a heartbeat, you are not in Venice but in far-off markets of Alexandria or Damascus, where caravans shuffle and traders haggle beneath desert suns. You thank him, move on before temptation empties your purse. In the distance, bells toll again. The sound cuts through the noise, steady, anchoring. People pause, adjust their rhythm, then dive back into bargaining with renewed force. Your stomach growls again. The bread was only a teaser. You scan the stalls, searching for something heartier. A man sells roasted chestnuts, smoke curling upward in gray ribbons. You buy a small cone, the paper warming your hands, and crack one open. Sweet, nutty filling. You pop another into your mouth, walking slowly now, letting the chaos swirl around you. Somewhere, a musician begins to play. A fiddle, quick and sharp, its notes tumbling like water. Children dance in the space between stalls, clapping, laughing. A vendor tosses them a bruised apple. They split it, juice dripping down their chins. For all its dirt, noise, and fish guts, the market feels alive, vibrant, necessary. You realize that here, more than in churches, more than in palaces, this is Venice's heart. Not marble or gold, but bread crust, fish scales, herbs, and noise. You take another bite of chestnut, close your eyes, and let the city roar around you. The market clamor fades as you thread through a narrower alley, chestnuts still warm in your hand. You wipe salt and soot from your fingers onto your cloak, careful not to smear it too badly. Though in truth, no Venetian cloak remains spotless for long. The air here carries fewer cries of merchants, replaced by the steady creak of wooden wheels and the grunt of dockworkers hauling crates. You're walking toward the heart of Venice's other stomach, the warehouses. The buildings grow taller, sturdier, their lower stones dark with centuries of brackish water. Heavy wooden doors, iron-banded, stand open, revealing shadows inside. Men in rough tunics and leather belts shuffle to and fro, balancing sacks of flour on bent backs, dragging barrels that roll like thunder across the planks. You step aside to let a pair pass, their faces red from strain. The smell shifts, too. Here it is grain dust, sawdust, tar, salt, wine vinegar spilled from a cracked cask. You cough once, brushing powder from your lips, and press deeper. A seagull shrieks from a beam overhead, then flaps through the dust-moated air like a thief caught mid-act. Inside the largest warehouse, you pause, blinking against dimness. Shafts of light pierce through narrow slits high in the walls, illuminating floating particles of grain dust like golden smoke. Stacks of sacks rise in rough towers, leaning precariously, each tied with coarse rope. Some are marked with painted symbols, black for wheat, red for rye, a circle for barley. A clerk sits at a table, quill scratching, tallying arrivals. He barely glances up, muttering numbers, his inkwell nearly dry. You watch as another cart arrives, 2 oxen panting, hauling sacks from Padua. The driver wipes his brow and shouts something about being shortchanged. The clerk ignores him, quill never pausing. This grain is the true lifeblood of Venice. Without it, Your bread this morning would never have existed. Venice cannot grow much of its own. Too little land, too much water. Instead, grain comes from everywhere: Dalmatian coasts, Lombardy plains, even ships from the Black Sea. And here's a quirky tidbit. Venetians once stored emergency grain in special state-run granaries, guarded almost like treasure vaults. During famine, the government could ration it out, ensuring riots didn't boil over into chaos. Bread riots were a real fear. People might endure bad politics, but they won't endure empty stomachs. You walk further in. Workers slash open sacks, letting golden kernels pour like waterfalls into bins. Dust rises, coats your nose, makes you sneeze so hard a nearby laborer laughs. He wipes his own streaming eyes with a filthy sleeve, says something in dialect you barely catch, and goes back to hefting a sack. The sound of grain cascading is mesmerizing, like endless rain against stone. You trail your hand across a bin, let kernels sift through your fingers, cool and dry, little beads of survival. For a second, you imagine the loaves they'll become, the porridges, the crusts cracked open in hungry mouths. Beyond the grain, the next chamber holds barrels. Rows and rows, stacked too high, each sealed with wax. Wine, oil, vinegar, each vital, each heavy. One man hammers a lid closed, the sound echoing like a drumbeat. Another rolls a barrel across the floor, the wood thumping like a heartbeat. A curious scent makes you pause. Olives, sharp and briny. One barrel has cracked. Green olives bob in murky brine, shimmering faintly in the light. A boy kneels, scooping them into a bucket, stealing one for himself when he thinks no one is looking. You wink at him. He grins, pops it into his mouth, chews happily. Historians still argue whether Venice's warehouses were safer from theft than other cities. Some say the Republic's strict punishments, floggings, fines, exile, kept thieves wary. Others believe pilfering was constant, little bits vanishing like steam no matter how tight the guard. Looking around, you suspect both are true. After all, how do you guard against a boy's quick fingers and hungry belly? You press deeper. The light grows dimmer, air cooler. You find spices again, this time not in tiny merchant stalls but in crates. Cinnamon bundled in cloth, nutmeg still in shells, peppercorns sealed in sacks. The smell is overwhelming, sweet, sharp, earthy. Workers handle them with reverence, as though afraid of losing even a grain. One crate lies open, and you catch a glimpse of saffron threads, luminous in the dimness. A guard stands nearby, hand on his sword hilt, eyes never straying. This is wealth incarnate. Outside again, the brightness makes you squint. Across the canal, gondolas bob beside piers. You see men unloading more crates from a wide-bellied ship, ropes groaning, sailors shouting. The ship is heavy with flour, probably from Sicily. Each sack passed down is like passing hope itself. Your stomach growls again. Grain and barrels may feed Venice, but right now they don't feed you. A baker's boy rushes past carrying a tray of rolls, steam still rising. You almost chase him, laughing at yourself for the sudden thought. Instead, you linger at the water's edge. You realize the warehouses are not just storage, they are memory. Each sack, each barrel, each spice crate carries stories of fields, of harvesters, of faraway lands. Venice devours them all, turning the world into bread, oil, wine, and stew. The bells toll again, slow, deliberate. Workers straighten their backs, wipe sweat from brows, and shuffle toward the taverns. Lunch hour. You follow the current of bodies, letting the noise swell again. Behind you, the warehouses remain, their stones cool, their shadows long. They guard the city's stomach with stubborn silence. You follow the tide of workers spilling out from the warehouses, their chatter blending with the clank of buckets and the flap of gull wings above. Your own stomach mutinies again, louder this time, a growl that turns a passing dockhand's head. He grins, pats his own belly, and jerks his thumb toward the nearest alley, as if to say, "Don't worry, the taverns are this way." You obey. The narrow lane opens into a crooked square where tavern signs creak on iron hooks. Painted symbols dangle overhead, tankards, grapes, a pair of dice, each promising food, drink, or perhaps trouble. The square buzzes with life. barrels stacked at tavern doors, dogs sniffing at scraps, apprentices running errands, old men perched on stools trading gossip. You duck into the nearest tavern, a low-ceilinged room with beams stained by centuries of smoke. The air is thick with roasted meat, sour wine, and the tang of sweat-soaked tunics. Candles gutter in iron brackets, dripping wax onto scarred wood. At a corner, two sailors argue over dice, voices loud enough to rattle the table. The tavern keeper, a stout woman with sleeves rolled to her elbows, shouts over the din. She doesn't need to ask what you want. Everyone here orders roughly the same thing: bread, wine, something hot ladled from the pot. She slams down a clay cup, fills it with dark, rough wine, and sloshes it across the counter to you. A smear of foam trails down the side, sticky against your fingers. You take a gulp. It is sharp, acidic, barely softened by age. Definitely no Chianti. This is common tavern wine, watered just enough to stretch the cask, but strong enough to keep customers cheerful. The joke is that Venetian tavern wine was always half vinegar. Half the time it was true. She ladles stew into a wooden bowl next. It's thick, steaming, studded with beans, carrots, maybe a scrap of pork if you're lucky. Today you are. A pink shred clings to the side of the spoon. She slaps a hunk of bread beside it, and you retreat to an open bench. The bench is crowded, elbows jostling, laughter echoing. Dockhands gulp wine like water. Clerks sip carefully as they scribble notes even here. Someone starts humming a tune. Another bangs the table in rhythm, and soon half the room is chanting. You try to eat quickly before the noise swells too much. The stew tastes better than it looks. Earthy beans, softened carrots, broth rich with marrow bones simmered all morning. Bread soaks it up greedily, turning into a mush that still satisfies. Your jaw works, your stomach quiets, and a rare calm settles over you. Here's your historical nugget. Venetian taverns were regulated by the state because the Republic feared drunken riots almost as much as famine. Taverns were licensed, hours restricted, owners fined if trouble flared. But of course, regulation never quite stopped the dice games, the smuggled wines, the brawls that spilled into the canals. At the far table, one such near brawl brews now. Two men argue, voices slurred, over whether their ship's cargo will fetch profit or ruin. One slams his fist, knocking his wine to the floor. The tavern keeper storms over, wooden spoon raised like a weapon. The men wilt instantly. No one crosses her twice. You sip more slowly, watching. The tavern is not just a place to eat. It's Venice in miniature. Merchants bargaining over dinner, sailors swapping lies, beggars warming themselves by the hearth, gamblers scheming in corners. A smoky parliament where the price of pepper or the fate of a marriage might be decided over stew. Your quirky tidbit. Sometimes taverns doubled as informal post offices. Sailors would leave notes with tavern keepers, scrawled directions or names. If luck held, the message reached the right hands. If not, well, gossip spread faster than ink anyway. You finish the stew, wipe your bowl clean with bread, and lean back. Warmth spreads through you, not just from the wine but from the closeness of bodies, the roar of laughter. For a moment, you feel yourself part of the city's pulse. Then the door slams. A gust of wind snuffs out one candle. In strides a group of young nobles, cloaks embroidered, boots clean. The room hushes slightly, eyes turning. Nobles don't usually drink here. They smirk, toss coins onto the counter, demand wine better than the common swill. The tavern keeper produces a dusty bottle she's saved for such moments. Historians still argue whether nobles slumming in taverns were seeking thrills or flaunting power. Either way, their presence shifts the air. The sailors mutter, the clerks keep heads down, and you feel a line drawn invisible between privilege and survival. But food, at least, remains a bridge. The nobles dig into bowls of the same stew, dunk bread with the same hunger, laugh with mouths full. And you can't help but think. Stew tastes the same no matter the coin in your pocket. Outside, bells toll again, softer this time. Workers rise reluctantly, toss coins, file back toward warehouses. The tavern empties slowly, voices fading into the square. You linger, finishing your wine, watching wax drip from the last candle. When you finally step outside, the sun tilts westward. Shadows stretch, gulls circle. The square quiets, but the smell of stew clings to your cloak, earthy and comforting. You pat your stomach, sigh, and follow the tide of Venice once more, the tavern fading behind like a warm, noisy dream. You wander further from the tavern, the clamor fading into the hum of the city. By now, the sun leans heavily toward the horizon, casting gold across tiled roofs and gilded balconies. The air smells different here. Not stew and sweat, but roasted meat drifting from narrow kitchens wedged between houses. Your stomach, traitorous as always, perks up again. A turn down one crooked street delivers the sight. A butcher's stall closing for the day, its hooks bare save for a few scraps, and beside it a cookshop. The cookshop's hearth glows red, smoke spilling into the lane. On a spit, skewers turn slowly, each loaded with chunks of meat that hiss and drip fat into the coals. You shuffle closer. The cook, a wiry man with one blind eye, turns the skewers with a practiced hand. He barely glances at customers, just grunts when coins rattle into his dish. A boy works beside him, slicing onions and brushing the meat with some herb-scented oil. The smell is devastating. Here, meat skewers are no fancy banquet dish. They're the quick fix of hungry laborers, dock workers, anyone with a few coins left after wine and rent. Pork, mutton, sometimes even scraps of goat. Whatever the butcher couldn't sell whole, the cook skewers, bastes, and sells one stick at a time. You pay, and he slaps a skewer into your hand. The wood is hot, grease slick on your fingers. You blow, bite, and nearly burn your tongue. The meat is smoky, salted heavily to mask its age, but the char and herbs make it irresistible. Each bite demands another, until the skewer is bare, teeth scraping wood. A girl beside you eats her skewer with practiced efficiency, then tosses the stick onto the cobbles. Soon you notice dozens of such sticks scattered about, chewed bare, proof of the crowd that has passed here today. The skewers are the fast food of the 14th century. Cheap, filling, eaten standing in the street. And like modern street food, they come with gossip. Men lean close, trading news of ships, markets, even scandals. The cookshop is half grill, half rumor exchange. Mainstream fact: Venetian authorities often crack down on open-air cooking, worried about fire hazards. But they tolerated these stalls because they fed the working class cheaply. Without them, half the dockside would go hungry. Quirky tidbit: some skewers weren't meat at all, but roasted eel segments threaded onto sticks. Eel was abundant in the lagoon, cheap enough for poor households. Imagine biting into what you think is pork and realizing it wriggles a bit too fishy. You lick the last salt from your lips, but already the next skewer tempts. The cook raises an eyebrow as if daring you. You buy another. This one is tougher, stringier, but hunger doesn't mind. Behind you, two men argue over whether the meat is truly mutton or just dog. Laughter ripples. Historians still argue, too. Sources disagree on how common dog meat was in medieval cities. Some swear it was taboo. Others claim desperate times made anything fair game. You glance uneasily at your half-finished skewer, decide not to ask, and keep chewing. The crowd thickens as evening deepens. More workers, more travelers, even cloaked men from the arsenal arriving to eat before the night shift. The cook's hands never stop, turning, basting, serving. The coals flare as fat drips, sparks dancing into the twilight. For a moment, you feel the raw pulse of street life. Here, there's no pomp, no gilded plates, just heat, hunger, and the shared satisfaction of hot meat on a stick. The clatter of coins, the hiss of oil, the chatter of tired voices. It all blends into a rhythm older than Venice itself. By the time you toss your own bare stick to the ground, the cook is loading new skewers, the boy slicing more onions, the crowd pressing closer. The stall never truly empties, not while bellies growl and coins still clink. You wipe your greasy fingers on your cloak, a mistake you'll smell later, sigh contentedly, and continue down the street. The last bite lingers in your mouth, charred, salty, and undeniably Venetian. The evening cools as you slip further into the labyrinth of Venice. Lanterns flicker on doorways, their flames caught in glass shields to keep the wind from snuffing them out. The day's meals, bread, porridge, beans, stew, and skewers, should have filled you, but your nose betrays you. A fresh scent coils through the alley, sugar melting, nuts roasting. It lures you like a string. At the end of the lane stands a sweet seller's stall. The merchant is a rotund man with powdered sugar dusting his tunic, as if he has just wrestled a sack of flour and lost. On his table, bowls of candied almonds, honey cakes stacked in pyramids, and jugs of thick, dark syrup that gleam under torchlight. Children hover nearby, clutching coins, while older men pretend not to want any and then quietly buy two. You inch forward, and the sugar merchant grins, offering a bite of candied nut. The almond crunches loud between your teeth, its shell hardened with honey and spice. It is at once tooth-achingly sweet and faintly bitter from the char of the sugar. Your tongue tingles, your mind perks awake, even as your body longs for bed. Venice in the 14th century was a candy crossroad. Cane sugar came from the eastern Mediterranean, from Cyprus and beyond. Merchants brought it in bulk, and Venetian kitchens worked alchemy with it. Rich households demanded marzipan shaped into castles, fruits dipped in syrup, and elaborate sugar sculptures for banquets. But even the street vendor carved a share of the sweetness for common folk. Mainstream fact: sugar was still a luxury, but Venice helped spread it into everyday diets earlier than many other European cities. Not quite daily fare for the poor, but for festivals and splurges it was there. Quirky tidbit: medieval cooks sometimes mixed ground sugar with black pepper and claimed it soothed digestion. Imagine spooning that into your tea. Sweet and sneezy at once. You pay for a small honey cake. It's squat dense, flavored with cinnamon, a spice more costly than gold by weight, yet shaved sparingly here for flavor. The cake sticks to your fingers, crumbs trailing down your tunic, but it melts soft on your tongue. Around you, the crowd indulges. A mother licks syrup from her child's cheek. A sailor crunches candied nuts and hums. Even a hooded friar sneaks a honeyed fig when he thinks no one watches. The sugar merchant chuckles at their eagerness. Sweetness, he says, is a cure for sadness. And you believe him. For in this hard world of labor, blisters, and hunger, a lump of sugar can feel like luxury distilled into crystals. Historians still argue whether sugar was truly seen as a medicine first or a treat first. Apothecaries sold it as both tonic and indulgence. Some records show nobles prescribed candied fruit for illness. Others describe children begging for it at fairs. Truth lies, as always, somewhere between. You lean back, watching as more coins clink, more sweets vanish. For a moment, Venice feels alive in miniature. Spice routes condensed into a mouthful, centuries of trade crystallized into sugar. And when you finally walk away, tongue still buzzing from sweetness, you can't help but smile at the thought. Even in the 14th century, humanity's greatest weakness was dessert. The moon is high over the Grand Canal now, its reflection broken by rippling gondolas and stray pieces of driftwood. You press a hand to your belly, full from bread, beans, fish, meat, and sweets, and yet the day's feast is never really finished. For every Venetian merchant like you, food isn't simply about filling the stomach. It is about navigating the invisible web of beliefs, fears, and little superstitions that lace every bite. You slip into a small tavern near the bridge, not so much for more eating, but to sit and listen. At this hour, merchants talk louder, their tongues loosened by sour wine. What they say isn't always about business. It's about whether a particular stew causes too much wind, or whether cheese clogs the chest and leads to melancholy. You smirk, but you've repeated some of these maxims yourself. One friend insists beans make men sluggish in the head. Another swears they increase fertility. A sailor recounts a story of a captain who banned onions aboard, believing they stirred up anger among the crew. Everyone laughs, but none entirely dismisses him. After all, the line between medicine and kitchen wisdom in this century is blurred beyond recognition. Mainstream historical fact: medieval dietetics, based on humoral theory from ancient Greek physicians like Galen, dominated how people viewed meals. Foods weren't just fuel, they were hot, cold, moist, or dry, affecting the balance of your bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much of the wrong thing, and you risked madness, illness, or worse. Quirky tidbit. Some Venetians believed lettuce cooled the body so much it dulled desire, while garlic was considered a stimulant. Yes, the medieval world thought of garlic as an aphrodisiac. Imagine whispering that at dinner. Careful, love, one more clove and you'll be scandalous. A platter of lentils passes by, steaming and earthy. Someone mutters they're windy and best avoided before a meeting with dignitaries. You chuckle, picturing a chamber full of noblemen discreetly coughing to cover bodily sounds. Still, superstition runs deeper than humor. Suspicion clings to certain meats: pork too fatty, goose too unsettling, hare thought to encourage cowardice. Fish, though mandatory on fast days, had its own lore. Some believed eels, with their snake-like bodies, carried evil humors. Others praised them as strengthening. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were widespread truths or eccentric anxieties written down by a few anxious clerks. You sip your thin wine and recall your mother's advice. Never eat fruit after fish, lest your stomach revolt. And you remember neighbors whispering that cheese after melons could kill a man in his sleep. You survived both combinations, though perhaps with a stomachache or two. The tavern's fire crackles. A woman at the next table sprinkles salt over bread and murmurs a prayer. Salt, after all, purifies, warding off both sickness and evil. You think back to the monopoly that made Venice rich. It isn't just economics, it's protection in crystalline form. Your own meals are shaped by these rules, even when you scoff at them. At banquets, you nod when physicians say to end with pears for closing the stomach. At home, you hesitate before pairing wine with certain stews, even if your mind says nonsense. The tongue remembers what fear teaches. And so you realize dinner isn't just flavors and textures. It is a ritual of belief. Each bite a gamble, each sip a calculation, each superstition a shield against invisible dangers. Whether or not the rules hold truth hardly matters. They soothe, they explain, they make the uncertain world feel mapped, one bean, one fig, one superstition at a time. The lanterns of Venice burn lower now, their flames trembling in the salty night air. Yet your evening is not done. A merchant's stomach, especially in the 14th century, rarely rests quietly after a day like yours. For what follows the main meal is the part that lingers longest. The after-dinner rituals that turn a simple supper into a performance, half social theater, half digestive strategy. You lean back against the cool wall of your palazzo's dining hall, your belt discreetly loosened beneath the folds of your robe. Around you, servants clear the trenchers of bread now soaked through with juices, carrying them off to be distributed to the poor waiting at the gate. The clatter of pewter cups, the scraping of knives against wooden platters, it all fades, leaving a different rhythm. The murmurs of men and women savoring the last moments of the feast. At your elbow sits a dish of candied almonds, their shells shiny from honey and dusted with a hint of cinnamon. Sweet, crunchy, and sticky all at once, they are the jewels of the meal, the little reward for surviving the marathon of beans, bread, fish, and meat. You pop one in your mouth, teeth breaking through the hardened shell with a satisfying crack. The sweetness coats your tongue, chasing away the heaviness of earlier courses. Here lies the curious logic of after-dinner sweets. They are believed to settle the stomach. Physicians say sugar strengthens the heart, and candied spices close the belly, preventing dangerous vapors from rising. Whether that's science or sorcery, you don't argue. You simply enjoy the taste. Mainstream historical fact. Venetians in your time were notorious sweet tooths, fueled by ready access to sugar from their Mediterranean trade. Unlike Northern Europe, where honey remained the staple sweetener, Venice could afford sugar loaves imported from Cyprus and beyond. It wasn't cheap, but for merchants like you, it was affordable enough to become habit. Quirky tidbit. Some nobles chewed fennel seeds or anise after meals, not just for digestion, but to sweeten the breath before social encounters. Imagine that, a medieval mint. The cups of wine return, but this time cut with water and warmed gently, served with spices drifting in their depths, nutmeg, clove, maybe a whisper of cardamom. This concoction is more than a drink, it is a quieting agent. As the warm spiced wine slides down your throat, the tension in your shoulders loosens. Your mind grows slower, calmer. This is how Venetians prepare to drift into evening conversations and eventually sleep. Someone across the table begins strumming a lute. A gentle tune floats into the rafters, filling the silence between bites and sips. Laughter follows, not the boisterous laughter of daytime taverns, but something softer, the laughter of people who know the night is theirs to waste. You laugh too, and in the midst of it, you're aware of how your body hums with food and fatigue. Historians still argue whether dessert in the modern sense, sweet dishes at the very end, was a formal invention of later centuries, or if these candied nuts, fruits, and spiced wines already counted as its early form. What is certain is that by your time, sweets had taken root in Venetian dining as the final brushstroke of the meal. Another platter arrives, slices of pear and apple, lightly baked, glistening with honey. Your physician friend insists fruit closes the stomach, sealing everything inside like a careful lid. You grin and take 2 slices anyway, telling yourself you're only following medical advice. Conversation drifts from trade matters to gossip, whose daughter is promised in marriage, which ship is rumored lost, whether Genoa might dare another move against Venice. Yet the talk always circles back to food. Someone praises the candied orange peel brought by a sailor from Iberia. Another tells of pepper cakes baked in Florence. Food is memory, competition, pride. You stretch, feeling the heaviness in your limbs, the quiet protest of a body worked hard and fed well. The ritual of after dinner is complete. Sweets, spiced drink, soft music, and idle talk. Tomorrow, new meals will arrive, shaped by tides, markets, and superstition. But tonight you sit content, wrapped in the glow of candles and candied almonds, aware that every Venetian meal is not just eaten, it is staged, digested, and remembered. And so, with one final sip of sweetened wine, you rise, ready to leave the hall behind and step into the velvet of Venetian night. The night is silent now, save for the occasional lapping of water against stone. You step away from the hall, the last hints of spiced wine still on your breath, and wander slowly toward the balcony overlooking the Grand Canal. Venice lies hushed before you, a city balanced precariously between the sea and the sky, between hunger and indulgence, between survival and luxury. And as you lean against the cool marble, your mind drifts backward, inward, across all the meals that have carried you through the day. The dawn had started with bread, humble and filling, dipped in oil and sprinkled with salt. By mid-morning, you'd tasted dried figs, nuts, and that familiar comfort of chickpeas simmered into a thick paste. Midday brought the noise of the market, where fishmongers, fruit sellers, and spice hawkers all jostled for attention, their goods shaping not only what you ate but who you were. Later came the heartier meals, salted cod, creamy risottos, and stews that bubbled with the flavors of the Adriatic. And always, always, the quiet company of wine, diluted but persistent, binding every bite together with warmth. A strange truth strikes you. Though each dish felt small and fleeting at the time, together they formed the scaffolding of your day. They shaped your energy, your humor, your business dealings, even your place in Venetian society. Food is never just food. It is currency, status, ritual, medicine, memory. You realize your daily meals are as carefully layered as the canals themselves, built one tide at a time, one bite at a time. Mainstream historical fact. Venetian merchants like you truly lived at a crossroads. Your diet bore traces of Greek olive oil, Arab sugar, Balkan wines, and Asian spices. In a single day's menu, the world gathered at your table. That interconnectedness gave Venice both its wealth and its vulnerability, a reality you tasted with every mouthful. Quirky tidbit. Some merchants swore that eating cabbage at night prevented bad dreams. An odd superstition, though one you've tried once or twice after too much salted fish. Historians still argue whether Venice's cosmopolitan diet made its citizens healthier than their European neighbors or more prone to stomach ailments from the sheer variety. The records speak both of resilience and of endless complaints about indigestion of foreign foods. The moon's reflection ripples on the canal, and you find yourself exhaling slowly, your body heavy, your eyelids tugged downward by both food and fatigue. The after-dinner sweets have left their trace, the wine its warmth. You could swear you hear the faint sound of lute strings still humming from the hall. And you think perhaps this is what it means to be Venetian, to live each day as a performance of appetite, trade, and taste. Your hand rests on the cold stone railing. Tomorrow the cycle begins anew, the bread, the beans, the fish, the wine. Yet tonight, you allow yourself the rare gift of stillness. And so, as the candles burn low and the city of Venice dozes beneath its cloak of mist, you too feel the rhythm of sleep approaching. Your body has carried the weight of a long day. Steps on cobblestones, the hum of bargaining voices, the salt of sea air, and your meals have carried you just as much. Every bite, from the rough crust of morning bread to the final sweetness of candied almonds, has built a slow and steady ladder, leading you gently here, to the soft edge of night. Let the sounds of the city dissolve now. The faint splash of an oar in the lagoon, the muffled laughter of sailors returning late, the last creak of shutters being drawn closed. Instead, focus on the warmth that lingers inside you, the heavy calm of food well-earned and well-shared. Imagine it spreading outward, from your stomach through your chest and into your limbs, like a tide easing its way back to the sea. If thoughts wander, let them drift the way gondolas drift on still waters, carrying you without effort. You are safe, the city is safe, and for this moment, nothing is demanded of you but rest. The night holds you as surely as the walls of your palazzo, and the water itself seems to whisper lullabies against the stones. Close your eyes now, breathe slowly, and let the Venetian night fold around you. There will be bread and beans and wine again tomorrow, but for now, there is only this calm, this gentle emptiness. Sleep deeply, dream lightly, and when you wake, may you carry with you the quiet richness of a merchant's meal.